Hope lives, always. We all live in need of blessings, of moments where God touches our hearts and provides personal care and assurance. Often we imagine what the blessings of God are going to look like. We picture the places that they're going to happen and the circumstances that bring them on, what it's going to feel like to receive those blessings. Yet when most of us look back on the moments of blessing in our lives, we recognize that many, if not all of these things, came in different ways than we pictured. And even though they didn't look like we thought they would, they were just as profoundly powerful. Many years ago, I traveled to the Holy Land to literally walk the paths that Jesus did. It was an experience that made a significant impact on my life and on my faith, so much that it's hard for me to even put into words how it felt. The entire flight home, the people I traveled with spent our time decompressing our trip with one another, sharing stories of what we saw and how we felt in Israel. And it was then, mid-conversation, not on the streets of Jerusalem or in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, in the places that I thought these things would occur, but in the cramped aisles of an airplane at 30,000 feet, that I took part in what would be among the greatest blessing of the entire trip for me. "Excuse me," came a voice from the seat behind me, and I turned to see an older woman clutching a rosary in her hands. "I couldn't help but hear your conversation," she said. "Are you a minister?" That's not a question that I get very often. And I looked at her and I said, "Well, yes, ma'am." And in that moment, this woman became overjoyed. "Oh, wonderful," she exclaimed. "I'm traveling home from the Vatican. And while I was there, I bought this rosary. But I wasn't able to find a priest to bless it for me before I left. Could you?" Now, I'm a Baptist minister. I'm not a Catholic priest. I've never been asked to bless a rosary before. And I shared all of that information with this woman. I told her that while I was an ordained minister, I was not a priest. That I could certainly pray, and I could ask God to bless her rosary and her desire to use it to pray. But she was going to have to discern if my blessing really counted in the way she wanted it to. It didn't take her very long to think about those words before she excitedly proclaimed, "Oh yes, I would love for you to ask God for a blessing." I reached up into my bag that was nestled in the overhead compartment, and I pulled out this stole, the one that I'm wearing right now, one of the few things that I bought in the Holy Land, and I draped it over my shoulders. And the moment I put it on, this woman began to cry. The blessing became real to her right then. And I took her hands, still holding that rosary, and prayed with her, asking God to bless her desire to use that rosary to pray. Now I know that this is not the way she envisioned this blessing going. She initially wanted a Vatican priest, not a Baptist with a Southern accent and an airplane. And yet in that moment, for her, God's blessing was real and tangible. And she wasn't the only one. When I opened my eyes from praying with her, I looked up to see a line of Catholic ladies with rosaries standing in the aisle so that they might receive a blessing as well. I think about that moment on the plane as I look around right now, as we face the uncertainty and the fear of COVID-19. This is not the environment that I picture when I imagine receiving God's blessings or when I imagine sharing in them. And yet, as I've seen before, the emergence of God's blessings are not dependent on the settings that I have envisioned. They can emerge in airplane aisles. They can emerge in moments of fear. and even now, in a world gripped by uncertainty. Because hope lives always.